Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. This is Miss Cadena. I'm going to record a short review of Chapter 16, Section 3, Politics in a Gilded Age. We actually started talking about it in class, but we didn't get to finish. So I'll refer to the book and page numbers it's in the big book. I know some of you have the smaller version of the book, but I'm going section by section in that chapter. So just follow along with me in your book. If you don't have the book, I really recommend you download the chapter outline that's in your folder, Blackboard folder for chapter 16. It really, really will help you. It gives you a nice outline of the chapters. Okay, so I'm starting on page 615, and again, we already covered some of this, but we talked about why it's called the Gilded Age at the start of class, this kind of covered in gold, where everything looked like it was great in the United States. And there are a lot of things that were happening that were really good in the United States, but there was also a lot of things that were happening that were really bad. And so this Gilded Age, this kind of sense that everything was golden, but it really, really wasn't. And we already talked about that earlier in the chapter with how that gap between rich and poor was continuing to widen, how African Americans, Native Americans surely are not benefiting from these advances in the Gilded Age. Much of America who falls into the poor working class certainly is not benefiting from the Gilded Age. So we're going to talk now about politics. And so your focus question for this section is, was the Gilded Age political system effective in meeting its goals? And one of the first things we already talked about was corruption. There was a lot of corruption in politics during that time period for lots of reasons, and not to say there isn't now. Of course, there still is corruption today, but government has evolved and changed over the past couple of hundred years, and so new laws and new regulations and ways of trying to curb um, corruption certainly has come about, but those things still do exist. And so, in your book, as you're reading, pay attention to those little green arrows on the side. They really kind of hit some important points. That's something you want to focus on. And one of the things we'll start with is remember that very close relationship between business and government. There was a big relationship between the two. And one of the biggest or most corrupt characters of this time period was Boss Tweed, William Tweed. And we talked about him and how he won support from the city's immigrant poor. He had connections with railroad men, the labor unions, and he kind of provided the people of his city of New York, especially of his kind of constituency area, with this kind of welfare system that gave them fuel and food and jobs when they needed them. So he was kind of buying their votes, if you will, and so he kind of formed this political machine that would help support him. And then we talked about President Grant, the gentleman you see over here holding on to the rings. This political cartoon symbolizes kind of everything he's having to juggle with all that. You see here the white strap in his mouth. It says corruption. And so all these corruption scandals that kind of were brought to the light under Grant's presidency. And one of the rings here to your left, it says whiskey ring right there, actually. So that's one of the corruption scandals you need to know about under Grant at a national level. The other one is, of course, the credit mobilier scandal. You need to know that one, where, of course, this kind of um, this situation where politicians were granting land to railroad companies that they were actually members of. So it's almost like they were putting money in their own pockets. It's like cutting deals for your own company. So those were the two big national scandals, and we did cover those in class, and make sure you know those. Okay, then we talked about this political cartoon where the gentlemen up here with that are the giant money bags are business, and of course they have this kind of dominant power over the members of the Senate. And then we talked about the politics dead of center, and what that means is that remember that the political parties were closely divided. We're on page 617. In other words, elections were very close, And the two parties, there really wasn't much that separated the two. Okay, and a lot of elections were very, very close because of that. So you need to know that. You need to know that elections were very closely contested, and those elections were closely contested, and the people who decided those contests were 80% of the eligible voters, 80% of Americans, well, I shouldn't say that, of eligible voters would turn out to vote, which is an astounding number, one that I wish, really, really wish we could reach today. But that's what you need to know for this particular section, the politics of dead center. And then we started to talk about the next section, which is titled Government and the Economy on page 617. And really the only thing you need to know about that section, and it's really on page 618, the very, very last paragraph, it talks about how Republican economic policies strongly favored the interests of Eastern industrialists and bankers. And that was to a disadvantage of the South. So it says East here, but your test might ask you about the North. Well, the Eastern bankers in New York is also the North. And so if it's anything that goes against the South, that means it's for the North. So you need to know that the Republicans, who were largely in charge of the federal government at this time, were very much in favor of big business. And they passed policies, laws, programs that would help big business. And that's what you need to know there. On the next section, called Reform Legislation, you need to know that what we talked about last time, this is Charles Guiteau. He killed President Garfield, the crazy guy. He killed President Garfield because he really believed that he was owed something, owed a government job for having helped Garfield become elected. That is what we call the spoils system. And so these people would be elected to high offices and award their friends with jobs in government, even if those friends were not qualified. And it's bad enough to find politicians that are qualified to be elected. Then they get to just name whoever they want. That was called the spoils system. And so they wanted to reform that. And so in 1883, they passed the Civil Service Act, which which created a merit system for federal employees. So you need to know that, the Civil Service Act. Basically what it is if you want a government job, you have to take a test. And you will get the job based on your merit, not based on who you know. So here we begin to see this practice of reform, of changing the government, that'll continue for the next couple of chapters, especially when we get to the progressive era. So keep that in mind. Other measures were passed during this time to kind of help curb the power of big business, and to reform the lives of average Americans, even though these laws were passed to subdue these huge companies. The one that you need to know was passed in 1887. It's called the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. And basically, the Interstate Commerce Commission was created so that railroad rates that were charged to farmers and merchants for transporting their goods, it made sure that those rates were reasonable, okay, and that they were not unfair, and would kind of prefer one shipper or company over another. So the Interstate Commerce Commission, 1887, regulated rates that were charged to farmers and merchants for transporting their goods, and they made sure that those rates were fair and didn't give one person an advantage over the other. You need to know that. Okay. The next section is called Political Conflict in the States, 619. Now, most of the stuff we've talked about is at the national level, Washington, D.C. There are a lot of conflicts also at the state level. And one of the things you need to know about is that third parties begin to emerge. And third parties have actually kind of emerged since the beginning of politics. But third parties in American history have really never had a huge impact. Just like, for example, in European countries, you typically have maybe 3 to 5 political parties, and all of them are strong. In the United States, we're pretty much a two-party system. But other third parties have come along, and while they haven't had a huge influence, they have had some influence on the other two parties. And one of the first ones you need to know about know about, rather, is the Greenback Labor Party. They are in the second paragraph of that section, Political Conflict in the States. And you need to know what this Greenback Labor Party proposed, what they wanted. They wanted the federal government to stop taking greenback money out of circulation, that paper money. If you take money out of circulation, it's less money out there in the public and less money for people to spend to pay their debts with. And that's what they wanted. The Greenback Party wanted the government to stop taking greenback money out of circulation. Okay. The next group that you need to know about is the Grange, and they are in the next paragraph, the third paragraph in Political Conflict in the States. And the Grange, they proposed establishing cooperatives for storing and marketing farm output, hoping to force carriers to take their produce at a fair price. So basically, there was kind of strength in numbers. So their idea was to work cooperatively together to hopefully get fair prices for everyone. The Grange was founded in 1867. Okay, and that's really kind of what you need to know about that. But political conflict is also at the state level. Okay, and that's it for that particular section, Politics in the Gilded Age. Do me a favor, when you're done watching this video, click the review button that's underneath the video, just so I can keep track or see who is actually watching the video, okay? Thanks. And please let me know if you have any questions.